I knew something was wrong the moment Marcus walked into the quarterly review with that PowerPoint smile plastered across his face like he'd just invented profit margins. He had this way of entering rooms like a motivational speaker, crashing a funeral, all teeth and unnecessary hand gestures, radiating the kind of confidence that only comes from failing upward your entire career. He didn't even look at me when he sat down. Just tossed his leather portfolio onto the conference table like he was closing a real estate deal and said, "All right, team, let's talk about innovation." Innovation, the word corporate managers use when they've run out of actual ideas but still need to justify their salary. I'd been with Meridian Tech for 6 years at that point. Started as a junior analyst, worked my way up to senior strategist, survived 3 reorganizations, and a merger that turned half the staff into walking anxiety disorders. I knew the company's infrastructure like I knew my own heartbeat. Every workflow, every bottleneck, every place where we were hemorrhaging time and money because some VP 12 years ago decided efficiency was less important than tradition. So when Marcus asked for innovation proposals, I came prepared. I'd spent 3 months developing a client onboarding system that would cut our intake time by 40%. Mapped out the entire process, built prototypes, ran simulations, even got preliminary buy-in from 2 department heads who were desperate for anything that didn't involve 17 signature approvals and a blood sacrifice to the IT gods. I stood up, connected my laptop, and walked them through it. Clean slides, clear data, real solutions to real problems we faced every single day. Marcus listened for maybe 90 seconds before he started scrolling through his phone. 2 minutes in, he interrupted. "Yeah, I'm gonna stop you right there, Angela." I paused mid-sentence, slide frozen on a workflow diagram I'd color-coded by priority level. He leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head like a man about to deliver wisdom from the mountaintop. This is exactly the kind of thinking that's holding us back. Holding us back. My solution that would save the company 6 figures annually was holding us back. "We don't need to reinvent the wheel here," he continued, gesturing vaguely at my presentation like it was a child's crayon drawing. "We need big picture thinking, disruptive innovation. This is just incremental tweaking." Incremental tweaking. That's what he called a complete system overhaul I'd built from scratch. Someone coughed. I could feel the rest of the team avoiding eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their coffee cups and notepads. Nobody wanted to be next. "I appreciate the effort," Marcus said, in that tone managers use when they're about to publicly eviscerate your work while pretending to be supportive. "But this feels very junior level, very safe. We need people who can think outside the box, not just rearrange what's inside it." He actually winked at me, like we were sharing a joke, like he'd just done me a favor by humiliating me in front of the entire strategy team. I sat down, closed my laptop with the kind of careful control that comes from imagining it was his face, and smiled. "Understood, thanks for the feedback." The meeting moved on. Marcus spent the next 40 minutes talking about synergy and paradigm shifts without saying a single concrete thing. He had this gift for using 1,000 words to communicate absolutely nothing, like a TED talk written by a random buzzword generator. But I wasn't listening anymore. Something had shifted in my chest, settled into place like a lock clicking shut. Not anger, not yet, just a cold, clear understanding. Marcus thought I was safe. Thought I was junior level. Thought I was someone he could dismiss with a wink and a platitude. He had no idea what he'd just started. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I updated my LinkedIn profile. Not obviously, not desperately, just subtle adjustments. Added a few key projects, updated my skills, made sure my experience was front and center. Then I started looking, not at random jobs, at specific opportunities. The kind that don't get posted on job boards because they're filled through networks and referrals. Senior positions at companies that actually valued innovation instead of just talking about it at quarterly reviews. I reached out to Emma Chen, my former professor from grad school, who'd gone on to become a consultant for tech firms doing digital transformation. We'd kept in touch over the years, occasional coffee meetups where she'd tell war stories about companies too stubborn to save themselves. "I need advice," I told her over video call, "and possibly a favor." Emma had this way of reading people, seeing past the professional veneer to whatever was actually happening. "Marcus shot down your onboarding system, didn't he?" I blinked. "How did you?" "Because I've seen it happen 100 times. Middle manager feels threatened by someone competent, so he kills their ideas before they can make him look bad." She leaned forward. "What do you need?" "Introductions. I want to talk to companies doing actual innovation work, and I want Marcus to realize exactly what he lost." Emma smiled, not kindly. I can work with that. Over the next 3 weeks, I had 7 interviews. Not desperate scrambling, just strategic conversations with companies that had heard about my work through Emma's network. Turns out when you spend 6 years actually solving problems instead of just talking about them, people notice. Meanwhile, at Meridian, I played the game. Showed up, did my work, smiled at Marcus's increasingly stupid suggestions. He was on this kick about gamifying client interactions, like adding badges and achievement levels to corporate software, would somehow revolutionize B2B sales. It was the kind of idea someone has after reading exactly one article about user engagement and understanding none of it. I watched him pitch it to the executive team with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever who just discovered tennis balls. Watched them nod politely while clearly planning to forget about it the moment he left the room. But here's what Marcus didn't know, what he never bothered to learn because he was too busy performing leadership instead of actually doing it. I had relationships throughout the company. Real ones. The kind built over 6 years of actually helping people solve problems instead of just showing up to take credit. Sarah in operations owed me for fixing a supply chain tracking disaster that would have cost her a promotion. David in IT trusted me because I was one of the few people who understood that technology problems were usually people problems in disguise. Even Janet from finance, notorious for trusting absolutely no one, would take my calls because I'd once spent a weekend helping her untangle a budget catastrophe that Marcus had created and then blamed on her team. So when I started quietly asking questions, people answered. How long had Marcus been taking credit for other people's work? Since he arrived 2 years ago. Whose ideas had he killed? At least a dozen good ones, including a customer retention program that would have prevented the churn problem we were now desperately trying to fix. What did people actually think of him? The answers ranged from incompetent to actively harmful with very few stops in between. I compiled it all. Not formally, not yet. Just kept notes, gathered receipts, built a mental map of every fire Marcus had started and every person he'd thrown under the bus to avoid the smoke. Then Catalyst Solutions called. They were a mid-size firm that had been growing aggressively, acquiring smaller companies and integrating them into a larger tech ecosystem. They needed someone to lead their strategic operations division, someone who could come in and actually build systems instead of just theorizing about them. The job description could have been written specifically for me. Everything I'd been doing at Meridian, except at a company that actually valued it. Better title, better pay, actual authority to implement ideas instead of watching them die in PowerPoint purgatory. The final interview was with Rebecca Torres, the CEO. She had this reputation in the industry: brilliant, demanding, absolutely intolerant of bullshit. The kind of leader who could spot a Marcus from 3 miles away and would fire him before he finished his first synergy presentation. She didn't waste time on small talk. Emma says you're the best strategic mind she's seen in 10 years, but she also says you've been stuck under a bad manager. Tell me about that. I could have been diplomatic, could have given some corporate-approved answer about different leadership styles and learning opportunities. Instead, I told her the truth. About the onboarding system Marcus killed. About the ideas he'd stolen and the people he'd blamed. About watching a company I cared about slowly suffocate under the weight of his incompetence while he collected bonuses for meeting metrics that I'd actually achieved. Rebecca listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Here's what I'm thinking, she finally said. We bring you on as VP of Strategic Operations. You build out your division however you see fit. And when you're ready, when you've proven what you can do with actual support, we have a conversation about what comes next. What comes next? We're acquiring Meridian Tech. Deal closes in 4 months. When it does, we're going to need someone to lead the integration, someone who knows the company inside and out. She looked at me directly. Someone who can identify which leadership is worth keeping and which needs to be removed. I felt something click into place in my chest. Not quite revenge, more like justice with a corporate letterhead. When can I start? I gave Meridian my 2 weeks' notice on a Tuesday, because all corporate executions happen on Tuesdays. Marcus called me into his office within an hour. He had this look on his face, confusion mixed with something that might have been concern if he were capable of caring about anyone besides himself. Angela, what's this about? I thought you were happy here. Happy? I'd spent the last 3 months watching him butcher every project he touched while taking credit for anything that went right. Just time for a new challenge, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Opportunity I couldn't pass up. Where are you going? Catalyst Solutions, VP of Strategic Operations. I watched his face process that. The title was 2 levels above my current position, at a company known for actually doing the innovation work Meridian only talked about. VP, that's wow, congratulations. He said it like the word hurt coming out. We'll definitely miss your contributions here. Contributions he'd spent 6 months minimizing and dismissing. I'm sure you'll manage, I said. The next 2 weeks were interesting. Suddenly Marcus wanted my input on everything. Suddenly my ideas weren't so junior level anymore. He kept trying to get me to document all my processes, train my replacement, make sure nothing fell through the cracks. I smiled and did the bare minimum. Wrote transition notes so vague they were basically useless. Held knowledge transfer sessions where I shared information that sounded helpful but carefully omitted the crucial details that made anything actually work. Petty? Maybe. But watching Marcus slowly realize he'd lost his safety net was its own reward. On my last day, he actually tried to take me to lunch. No hard feelings, he said. You're going to do great things. I declined politely, had other plans. Instead, I had lunch with Sarah, David, and Janet, told them to hang in there, told them changes were coming. Didn't specify what changes, but the way they smiled suggested they'd figured it out. Catalyst Solutions was everything Meridian wasn't. People who actually listened. Leadership that valued solutions over performance. A culture where innovation meant building things that worked, not just talking about disruption in meetings. I spent my first month learning their systems, understanding their processes, building relationships. Spent my second month implementing the onboarding system Marcus had killed, modified for Catalyst's needs. It worked even better than projected, cutting intake time by 47% and saving enough money that Rebecca mentioned it in the quarterly earnings call. By month 3, I was leading strategic initiatives across 4 divisions. The kind of work Marcus had always claimed was beyond my capabilities. And then the announcement came. Catalyst Solutions was acquiring Meridian Tech. The deal had been in the works for months, quiet negotiations behind closed doors. Now it was official, press releases and all-hands meetings, and the usual corporate theater. I was in the room when Rebecca announced the integration team. Watched her explain that we'd be conducting a thorough review of Meridian's operations, identifying efficiencies, and making necessary structural changes. Leading this integration, she said, will be Angela Mitchell, who many of you know has extensive experience with Meridian systems and culture. I wasn't just coming back, I was coming back in charge. The first integration meeting at Meridian was scheduled for a Thursday. I arrived early, set up in the main conference room, the same one where Marcus had dismissed my ideas 6 months ago. He walked in 15 minutes before start time, clearly trying to make a good impression. Stopped dead when he saw me at the head of the table. Angela, I didn't realize you'd be leading this. Surprise, I said, not smiling. The rest of the Meridian leadership filtered in. Some looked nervous. A few looked relieved. Everyone looked confused about why I was sitting in the power position. I waited until everyone was seated, then stood. For those who don't know, I'm Angela Mitchell, VP of Strategic Operations at Catalyst. I spent 6 years at Meridian before moving to Catalyst 5 months ago. I know this company, I know its problems, and I know exactly what needs to change. I pulled up my first slide, a workflow diagram, the same one Marcus had dismissed as junior-level thinking. This is the client onboarding system I proposed last year. It was rejected as too incremental, not innovative enough. I clicked to the next slide, showing implementation results from Catalyst. Since implementing it at Catalyst, we've reduced intake time by 47%, increased client satisfaction by 32%, and saved approximately $800,000 annually. The room was silent. I could see people doing the math, realizing what Meridian had lost. Over the next 6 weeks, we'll be conducting a comprehensive review of all operations. We'll be looking at processes, systems, and leadership effectiveness. Some positions will be retained, others will be restructured, and some will be eliminated entirely. I looked directly at Marcus. We value innovation, real innovation, not buzzwords and performance theater. If you've been doing actual work, building real solutions, helping this company succeed, you have nothing to worry about. If you've been coasting on other people's efforts while killing good ideas to protect your ego, well, you should probably update your LinkedIn profile. Marcus had gone pale. I watched him process it, understanding flooding his face. The person he'd dismissed, the ideas he'd killed, the career he'd tried to stall, all of it coming back with compounded interest. The next 6 weeks were surgical. I reviewed every project, every proposal, every decision made over the past 2 years. Talked to people Marcus had managed, people whose ideas he'd stolen, people he'd blamed when things went wrong. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just incompetence, but active harm. Projects killed that would have saved money. People driven out who'd gone on to succeed elsewhere. A pattern of taking credit and deflecting blame so consistent it could have been a case study in toxic leadership. I documented everything. Built a file so comprehensive that HR's only question was why it had taken this long. The meeting where I presented my findings to Rebecca and the executive team was brief. They'd seen enough integrations to know what good leadership looked like and what didn't. Your recommendation? Rebecca asked. Immediate termination. He's a liability we can't afford to keep. She nodded, make it happen. I didn't attend Marcus's termination meeting. Didn't need to. That wasn't about revenge or gloating. It was just business, removing a problem that should have been solved years ago. But I was there afterward when HR walked him out. Watched him carry his box of personal items past my office, past the conference room where he'd killed my presentation, past all the people he'd managed to convince he was leadership material. He saw me. Our eyes met. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just gave him a small nod. Professional, courteous. The kind of acknowledgement you give someone on their way out. His face said he understood. Understood that this wasn't random, wasn't coincidence. That every dismissive comment, every stolen idea, every person he'd underestimated had led directly to this moment. Then he was gone. I turned back to my office, to the stack of proposals on my desk from Meridian employees who finally felt safe sharing ideas. Real innovations, actual solutions, the kind of thinking that had been suffocating under Marcus's leadership. Sarah poked her head in an hour later. So, Marcus is gone. I heard. And you're his replacement. Interim division head, pending the restructure, but yes. She smiled. Good. We've got about 15 projects we've been sitting on, waiting for someone who'd actually listen. Send them over, let's see what we can build. That night I sat in my new office, Marcus's old office, though I'd already had maintenance remove his motivational posters and replace them with actual useful information, and pulled up the onboarding system proposal. The one he'd killed, the one that had started everything. I updated the timeline, modified it for the merged company structure, and scheduled it for implementation next quarter. Not because I needed to prove anything. Not because I was still angry, but because it was a good idea. Because it would help people, because that's what actual leadership looked like. Somewhere in my desk drawer was the notebook from that quarterly review, the one where I'd written down every dismissive comment Marcus had made. I pulled it out, flipped through the pages, read his words one last time. Junior level thinking, too safe, not innovative enough. I smiled, closed the notebook, and dropped it in the recycling bin. Didn't need it anymore. The best revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's building something so successful that their opinion becomes irrelevant. It's turning their dismissal into fuel, their underestimation into opportunity. Marcus had thought he was killing my idea. Instead, he just delayed it long enough for me to implement it somewhere that actually mattered, and then come back with the authority to fix everything he'd broken. My phone buzzed, message from Rebecca. Board meeting next month. Want you to present the integration results. They're impressed. I typed back, happy to, have some additional proposals for post-integration growth. Of course you do, send them over. I pulled up my files. 6 months of ideas, strategies, and solutions I'd been developing. The kind of thinking Marcus had called incremental. The kind that actually changed companies instead of just talking about it. Outside my window, the city lights were coming on. Inside, my computer hummed quietly, ready for whatever came next. I wasn't the person who'd sat in that quarterly review anymore. Wasn't the one who'd smiled and taken the dismissal and pretended it didn't hurt. I was the person who'd turned that hurt into strategy. Who'd built something better. Who'd come back not for revenge, but for the simple satisfaction of proving that good work, real innovation, and actual competence would always outlast corporate performance theater. Marcus had laughed at my ideas. Now I was his boss. Well, technically, I was the person who'd fired his boss and taken his job. Even better.